we dropped down and it's a gorgeous wreck. And there's like a 1927 Chevrolet coupe on this wreck. And the car was 1 year old when it sank, and it's still almost completely intact. You can still see the Chevy logo. You can still see the license plate.
Off Gassing, a scuba podcast with host Nick Hogel. In this episode, I interview Terry Irvine. During his open water course in the snowy Canadian weather, he was instantly drawn to what he refers to as the magic that happens underwater. The deep wrecks of the Great Lakes led him to pursue technical and overhead training. We speak about his passion for wreck diving, the discovery of Canadian Pacific Railway Locomotive 694, which crashed on June 10, 1910, and how he enjoys the simple, magical moments underwater. Please enjoy. Terry, how are you doing this evening?
I'm good. Nick, how about you? It's morning where you are, I suspect.
Yes. And the time change actually extended a little bit because you guys just had the fall back, spring forward time change. So, which is actually in some time zones, it makes it really nice. But if I had to do a recording the other day with somebody in California, and the time change is so huge. It was 1 a.m. Yeah, it was 1 a.m. for me and 9 a.m. for them. I was like, oh man, this is going to be tough.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Oh, yeah. No, man, I appreciate you coming on to the podcast, man. And so, yeah, I just want to pop out that first question. Tell me how and why you started scuba diving. Tell me about that first breath underwater.
Well, as a kid, I was always interested in diving. I right from a young age, I knew I wanted to do it. I guess I was part of that generation that saw lots of, Jacques Cousteau videos on TV and things like that. And I remember seeing all that and thinking, I really got to do that one day. And of course, when you're in high school and stuff like that, you have no money. University, you have no money. So I had to wait till I was working for a couple of years. And then, as soon as I was able, I took a course at a local Y in the city that I was working. And, I never really looked back. I've always really enjoyed the sport. I've always been really passionate about it. So, it was great. In my early years, my open water instructor was one of the original NAUI instructors certified in Canada. So there was a class of 62 instructors. And my first instructor, my open water instructor, was a guy named Sam Burton. He was in the Royal Air Force in Canada, and he was instructor number 037. My second instructor was Todd Shannon Sr., and his instructor number was 062. So, to kind of put that in perspective, I'm 14,863. So, I got to learn from some of the real pioneers, which was great. It was great. So I remember vividly my checkout weekend. It was in May. It was May of 1987. And the gear there was, at that time, was still, pretty rudimentary. We still had like horse collar BCs. And I remember having a little tank that we had to fill off our main scuba tank. And that was how we inflated the horse collar BC. So, things have gone a long way since then. But I remember our first dives, it was in May, and it was a snowstorm on a Saturday. It was just awful, but the diving was great. The second day we were in the St. Lawrence River, and we dove a little wreck that was in 19 feet of water, and I was hooked. That was it. I knew I wanted to do this. So that was 36 years ago, and I'm still passionate about it.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome, man. So what are water temperatures there? I mean, I would assume just in general, being up in Canada, it would be pretty cold.
Yeah. And I'm going to warn you right now that Canadians were an odd bunch, because we'll talk about air temperature in Celsius and water temperature in Fahrenheit. And I'll have to actually do a conversion in my head to think about what water temperatures were. So we were, I don't know, that time of year we were about 34, 35 degrees Fahrenheit. So you're
Oh
3 degrees
Lord.
C. And we're in a wetsuit, and so it was cold, and the little tricks where you have a thermos of warm water and you dump that down your wetsuit to kind of pre-warm the water a little bit. But again, it was you're on a wreck and there's fish, and it was fascinating. You're hooked. It's just it's a different world. It's a different environment, and
Yeah,
so
yeah.
but as with most divers in Canada, it isn't long before you migrate from a wetsuit to a dry suit. I tell people I use my wetsuit in the shower. I use a dry suit for everything except the shower. So we say, we'll still use wetsuits for like Mexico, and we'll still use dry suits for Florida cave diving. We'll dive a dry suit, but yeah, we're heavy thermal protection and a full up dry suit. But if that's the way you learn, then when you get the opportunity to dive in like a 3 mil suit, it feels great. It's awesome.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh man, that's awesome. And to be honest, so I'm very very bad with the conversion. So me being from Texas, the United States, I still kind of base everything off of Fahrenheit, and then I have
Yeah,
to adjust. And here living in Malaysia, I just know like certain temperature ranges are hot. So I'm like anything over 30 Celsius. Air temperature, it's hot, So
it's hot. Yeah,
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 so as soon as we
yeah,
hit the high 20s or low 30s, I'm like, this is pretty warm.
yeah.
But that's funny.
And it's interesting because most of the scuba instruction, most of the manuals and stuff, whether you're Naui or Patty, we're using American manuals, and so we'll talk about depths and feet. We'll talk about temperatures and in Fahrenheit. We'll talk about pressures and psi. But when I taught my son, and my son is now 26, we would talk about, okay, every 33 feet of seawater, and he would say, well, Dad, how many meters is that? And I have to do the conversion in my head. Fortunately, it's 10 meters. So
Yeah.
every atmosphere is 10 meters. But it was kind of interesting because as we moved to rebreathers, now we start looking at pressure and bar because many of the rebreathers that we're using are European. It's just interesting. We get a chuckle from it. The Canadian bilingualism. We have temperature differentials. So
No, for sure. And to be honest, meters is just so much easier when you're doing
oh yeah,
calculations.
oh
It's
yeah,
it's just yeah, hands down, just so much easier. So I'm gonna bring it back just a little bit because I definitely want to ask some questions about rebreathers. But so after the open water course, you were hooked. Was it just like, okay, what's the next class? What can I keep doing to progress?
yeah. So over the next few years, from '87 to '92, I did my open, my basic, my advanced open water, and I did that. I moved to Toronto, and I was doing that with Todd Shannon Senior, who was instructor number 062, and he had a fantastic advanced open water, but he would start the course in November and would run all winter, and we'd finish up in May. So we did some pretty aggressive. We would do compass work. In December in the Severn River. It was what it was. But I knew right away I wanted to be an instructor. So we kept at the courses. We did the advanced open water, and then the following year we did dive master, and we did that with Todd Shannon Senior, and then in 1992 I did my NAUI instructor, and I was fortunate enough that I was able to do that with my original open water instructor Sam, and so we went up to Ottawa, which is Canada's nation's capital, and did a week long ITC, and it was great. And we did the ITC in the environment that we were trained. So we were diving in the St. Lawrence River, we were diving in the Ottawa River. It was just it was special to me that I was able to do that course with my original instructor. And when he welcomes you into the fraternity of instructors, it meant something, and it was fun, and I still, to this day, I still have an active status. I don't teach much, but I can, I have a day job, so I can be selective in who I teach. And, I taught a good friend of mine back through COVID in his pool, and then I taught his two boys, and then we've been doing some diving since then. So it's been great. It's I love, a lot of people will say, I don't want to teach basic level courses, but that is the course where the magic happens. The two sons that I teach, we start every dive, and before we descend, we'll talk about what we're going to do. And I say, okay, let's go make some magic. That's where the spark starts. So it's fun to be part of that. It's fun to see them progress, but it's fun to be, they never forget their first instructor. So it's like your first girlfriend, I guess.
No, it's true. And even, I'm hoping to get back into teaching. I took this basically last year off, moving to Malaysia for my day job. I very much want to do like the discover scuba dives, the open waters, and start people right, start them out on the right fin, whatever you want to call it. And I absolutely agree, because it is where the magic happens. I mean, that's why my first question is always, tell me about that first breath, that first experience underwater, because everybody remembers it. Everybody always remembers that first time that they went underwater. And they might, I mean, there might be some milestones throughout their career, like, oh, I remember dive 155 because of this or because of that. But everybody remembers dive number one. And that's such a huge thing. So I'm assuming the technical, the deeper, starting to get into the decompression dives, did that happen after you were an instructor, or were you kind of going into that beforehand?
Yeah, we started to dabble a little bit, but it was kind of after I became an instructor. Where I live, I'm about an hour and a half west of Toronto, and in this part of where I live, I say I'm not really close to anything, but I'm central to everything. I'm central to pretty much every Great Lake. So we started exploring over on the Michigan side what they call the Michigan Thumb, and Lake Huron has sort of a big peninsula in Michigan that kind of protrudes out, and that's what they call the Thumb. So along Lake Huron, there was a lot of wrecks that were being discovered that were in between depths of 130 to 200 feet. So we wanted to start exploring them, and we were going from single cylinders to, I think in 1992 I bought my first set of doubles from OMS, and we started to do some diving in those depths, and we started to do some preliminary training, to be able to dive safely in those ranges. It wasn't long after that we decided, what, if we're going to learn how to do this, let's go and learn how to cave dive. And so many people, and I know you've talked to lots of people on your podcast about, that was the migration that everybody made, and that was what we did as well. We said, well, if we want to become better wreck divers, let's go down and learn how to, get. When you talk about peak buoyancy, nothing gives you peak buoyancy like being in a cave. You have no choice. So, of course, like everybody else, we go down. We have no interest in caves. We just want to become better wreck divers right until we do our cavern and intro, and then we're hooked on cave diving. So, but yeah, over from sort of 93 through to 95, we went down several times and completed a full cave course. And the interesting thing is there were 6 of us from here that went down. We had 2 instructors. One of those instructors was Jared Jablonski, who you've interviewed. And the other one is a gentleman by the name of Larry Green, which I hope you do get a chance to interview, because Larry has some amazing stories to tell, and we're going to try and get him on the show for you. But
oh, that'd be amazing.
So we had 2 guys that were absolutely awesome, and this was pre-GUE. Jared was still writing his first book, Fundamentals of Better Diving, and creating the GUE agency. And I remember him, talking about it at dinner in Alachua, one night. But, we went down and we fell in love with the caves, but it did have the result of making us better cave divers. And So at that time, this was still early to mid '90s, and helium was at that time it was cheap. So we started exploring helium. We did our trimix in 1996, and we did that course with Jared and Larry as well. And we said, hey man, we want to. There's this wreck that we've been wanting to dive up in Lake Superior called the Gunilda, and we want to dive it. It's in 250 to 270 feet of water, and we want to dive it. And we're going to take this trimix course for that purpose. And we did that in '96, and our first dive on the Gunilda was, I believe, 1998. The Gunilda was a dive that I wanted to do right from when I was certified. My buddy from university, he was going out with a girl that lived in Thunder Bay on Lake Superior. And when I got certified, he gave me a book called Shipwrecks of Lake Superior. And there was an article in that magazine about some guys out of Minnesota diving early dives on the Gunilda. And I was fascinated by it. And I thought, you know what, if I can ever dive that, I want to do it. And about 10 years to the day, or 11 years, I guess, we were on it. And man, we were petrified. We were scared. It was the biggest, baddest dive we ever did in our life. To that point, Superior's dark, it's cold, but the wreck itself was absolutely fascinating. And a couple of years later, we went back with some, very early video cameras like Digital 8 with HID lights, and did some video. And it's still one of those ones where I'll look back at that video and feel really good about the dives we did, and we captured it at a very specific point in time. Not many people had been exploring it up until then, and so it kind of helped open up, and it gave us a bookmark, I guess, for lack of a better word, on what the condition of the wreck was in 1999, 2000, and then from there we just kept going.
Oh, that's amazing, man. So tell me a little bit about when you finished that first trimix course, the trimix course, and then you were knowing that you were going to go and do that dive. What type of preparation were you doing? Because I'm assuming I mean, I don't know. Was it just like, okay, finish the class next? I'm assuming it's not the next dive, but you're building up to that dive.
Yeah. So when we finished the trimix course, we were doing again in the thumb in Lake Huron. Again, there was some stuff that was around 180 feet to 200 feet, and there's this wreck called the Morel, and it's split in half. And the bow section's in about 130 to 170 feet. The stern section, if you go in the engine room, is about just around 200 feet. So we were doing dives, sort of between 180 and 200 feet. We were also diving in southern Lake Superior. There's Whitefish Point, which is kind of made famous by, the Edmund Fitzgerald was almost a whitefish when it sank. And so we were doing a lot of diving there. It was all in between, 140 feet and 220, 230. So we kind of cut our teeth in those two spots, and then went up and did the Gunilda in 1998, and then shot video of it in 2000. Talk to Great Lakes divers. Everybody has their favorite lake, as do I, and it's Superior, and I just love it up there. That the landscape is fabulous. The lake itself is, it's rugged but magical, and it's just the condition of the wrecks in that lake are, you can see the paint from something that went down 100 years ago, quite easily. There's no zebra mussels on it. It's as it sank. The visibility isn't as good as it is in some of more southern lakes, but it is, in terms of detail, it's you capture it all. You capture it. So
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Well, another question, just to bring it back a little bit. So you did your cave diving, and obviously a lot, I should say the cave diving, the overhead environment, and obviously a lot could translate from cave diving to wreck diving, doing penetrations inside of wrecks. What differences can you tell me? Because I would assume, so I did not a little, I did an advanced wreck course. I haven't done any overhead cave training, but I would assume, because people will talk, okay, there's the differences between diving a mine to diving a cave. Not a whole lot of differences, but there are differences, and I would assume that there would be some big differences from diving a cave to diving a wreck. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the things that you have to navigate?
Yeah. So, and if we do that comparison, we'll compare penetration of wrecks. Because if you don't penetrate the wreck, then really all the skills that you're using from cave diving are really just buoyancy and bottle management. So an interesting point is if you talk to a cave diver about wreck penetration, they think you're crazy because that's dangerous. Like you go inside a wreck, like that the cave divers think caves are safe relative to wreck penetration. And I always figured, comparing wrecks to caves, wrecks can be inherently dangerous for penetration only because if the wreck is on its side or it's upside down, your orientation is off. You also have a lot of unstable or potentially unstable, items inside the wreck. There may be a damaged stair. There might be, loose debris in the cave in the wreck. I'm sorry, that kind of stuff. Whereas caves are typically fairly predictable. You have a tunnel, you have that, and as long as you're going in areas that are mapped, you have a pretty good sense of where you are. The downside of the cave is distance. So in a wreck, you might only go inside a wreck. Say if you go 50 feet in a wreck, that's a huge penetration. So you're never that far from an exit. Whereas a cave, even as what I call tourist cave divers, which I consider myself to be, it's not uncommon for us to be, several thousand feet back in a cave. So, you're starting to close in on a mile to the nearest exit, then, an emergency has to be dealt with right then and there. And I think the biggest thing that cave diving trains you to do, other than the buoyancy, is to be able to handle issues underwater without making an ascent. Like everything is dealt with right then and there. But yeah, it's funny. It's the same but different. A wreck penetration can be very tricky and dangerous. But again, the principles apply. We're going to run a rail. We're going to go inside. And just that's our way out is the line, just like a cave.
When I did my advanced rec course, I did a dive in Subic Bay in the Philippines called the New York. I would find it, obviously, depending on what type of cave diving you were doing, but I'm assuming most people that start out, they're kind of in bigger caves. They're not really restrictions or anything. And I didn't go through any restrictions. Well, I guess I should. I will say that I did go through some slight restrictions, but it's a pretty, I don't know if you've had the chance or know about the New York out in Subic Bay, but there's some areas you get into and you're like, man, I couldn't turn around right now. Like I'd have to move forward, then I could turn around and come back out. And those kind of moments are very eye-opening, and that'll wake you up, but I absolutely loved it. I was like, man, this is like, I hate to use the term like this, but I'm like, I feel alive right now. Because I just like my sense of awareness is just boom. To move it forward, well, I was gonna say to move it forward just a little bit, I'd like to talk about 694, but before we do that, I want to say, talk about your progression into rebreathers. When did you kind of first start looking at them? Obviously, I know a lot of people, when they start getting deeper, dives start getting longer. They're like, okay, well, we're either going to carry a lot of bottles with us, or we're going to start looking at different technology to help move this along.
Yeah, and it's interesting you talk about the locomotive diving, because it was searching for the locomotive that actually got us onto rebreathers. So I'll kind of back up a little bit, because the locomotive, the CPR 694, is a locomotive that sank in June 1910, and it derailed off a track that was traveling along northern Lake Superior, not far from. It was kind of in between a Marathon and Rossport. So along that section, and they knew where it went off pretty closely, but then nobody had ever found it. And we were up doing a lot of diving in Lake Superior, and the wrecks up there. There's two wrecks that are quite well known. The Gunilda was a luxury yacht that sank in 1911, and then there was a small freighter called the Judge Hart, which sank in, I believe it was 1942, and it was a small canaler, so a small freighter. And it sits in about 200 feet of water. So we were up diving those two wrecks a lot. And the guy that we chartered with up there, Paul Turpin, we said to Paul, Paul, is there anything else to dive up here? And he said, well, there's a locomotive that went off the track, in the early 1900s, and nobody's ever found it. And so we, in I guess it was probably 2014 was the first time we decided, well, let's go looking for it. And that spot is it's beautiful, but it's really deep and really rugged. So there's a steep rock face, and then the track is literally cut into the side of the mountain there, and it's about 60 feet from the water's edge, and then of course the water itself, we're maybe 50 yards offshore, and it's 500 feet of water. Like it's like a sheer wall, and it comes down to terraces, but. So we started looking for this locomotive, and we were still diving open circuit. And, helium was still available. It was starting to get expensive, but we were still diving open circuit because that's what we knew. We were comfortable with it. And we had scooters, direct propulsion vehicles, and we just started looking for it. The first day, we thought, man, this is great. We found the bogey wheels, the very front section of the locomotive, and they're in 28 feet of water. We thought, this is great. And then we proceeded to continue to go down the wall and looking and going back and forth with scooters. And it was our very last dive that we found one of the two boxcars that were attached to the locomotive, and that was in 285 feet of water. And we were just about at the end of our dive, and we had a camera on the scooter. We got a couple of shots, a couple of photographs. But the funny thing was, the year before, Lake Superior had frozen to within 92% of the entire surface. So by mid-August, we had, at 20 feet, we had 37 degrees Fahrenheit. And at 12 feet, we had 41 degrees. So we would go as shallow as we could on our final stop. And it was miserable. It was a long decompression, and I remember getting back up on the boat, and the guy I was diving with, Greg Hilliard, I looked at him and I said, I can't do that on open circuit anymore. We just can't do that. So the following year, he and I both found used machines. He found a Meg and I found a Revo, and we went down and did our Mod 1, our very first course with an instructor out of Minnesota, and we did our training down in Florida. Some of just the caverns and open water in Florida. So we spent 2015, getting lots of hours on the machine, and then we went back in 2016, and then by that time, kind of word of what we had found on the boxcar had gotten out, and there was multiple people looking for it. So we were very fortunate. There was our rebreather instructor was involved. There was a guy by the name of Tom Crossman out of Duluth. He had ROV, and so he was the one that actually, based on the GPS coordinates we gave him on the boxcar, he found the actual engine, the locomotive, and then we dove that in 2016. It was, again, when you think about dives that were really special, that was certainly one of them. One of the guys in our team had applied for and got an Explorers Club flag. We have a photo of the one lady on our team, Alicia. She's holding the flag right in front of the train, and we get you can clearly see the train and see the Explorers Club flag. So that was pretty special. That was cool to be involved in that.
Yeah, that's super wild because, I don't want to say it seems normal, but obviously it would be more normal to see a shipwreck underwater, but to actually see a locomotive would just be completely mind-blowing. So that is really amazing. So it sits at 285, is that correct?
The locomotive actually sits a little bit shallower, though. So the locomotive sits at around 245 feet. Because what happened when it was going over, it derailed from the track. It kind of arced, went into the water, and then you could see it hit one of the terraces at about 200 feet and literally plowed boulders out of the way. And there's a path, and it stopped at 245 feet. From the locomotive, it kind of angles down at maybe about a 45-degree angle to about 300 feet, and then it's a sheer drop again. So we have not found the coal car, which was, there was the engine, the coal car, and two box cars, and we found the box cars, but we haven't found the coal car. We think it went over the edge, because then now we're into 450 feet, which is, none of us are interested in going down there to look for the coal car. So Tom did look for it with the ROV, which of course is capable of doing those depths quite easily, but we haven't found it yet. So, but that's something we would love to be able to, even if we can just get video and photos of it with the ROV, we would love to do that.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. So let me ask you this question. So a lot of times, you hear about it's the journey, not the destination, right? So what do you think you like more, the actual process of searching for the wreck and going through that with your teammates and your buddies and looking into leads and going, because I'm sure the actual finding of the wreck has to be an absolute joy. But what, like, did you know what I mean by the question? Like, is there a
Yeah. So I've had the fortunate opportunity to be involved in three projects. One was kind of relocating the Judge Hart after it was originally discovered. The second was the locomotive, and the third was a wreck called the Manitou, which is not that far from where I live. And it was a passenger freighter that sank in 1928, and the Judge Hart and the locomotive we basically had to go out and just go looking. And the locomotive was fun because, we it was a fairly small search area. We kind of had a good sense of where it went down. It went down between this tunnel and this tunnel. And I remember us just going back and forth doing runs with direct propulsion vehicles, and we did find, we found the cab from the locomotive at about 200 feet. We were finding all kinds of artifacts on the way down. We were disappointed on our first trip that we didn't find, the actual engine, and I think we were pretty close. But it was kind of, the locomotive is in kind of a pocket, like there's boulders all around it. But like finding that boxcar, man, that was like, it made that miserable decompression worth it. The Manitou was fun because it was and a team, Ken Merriman, who does a lot of shipwreck hunting. He's really good at it. He and a couple of guys, his partner Jerry Eliason, they do a lot of shipwreck hunting. And we were actually diving in Wisconsin, and we got a phone call. And this was back in 2018, and they'd been looking for this wreck, and they found it. They actually found two wrecks in one day, and they were looking for both of them, and they found both of them. And we got a call from Ken Merriman, because he was trying to find somebody that could dive, to 200 feet. And that particular day, we're out doing some 300 footers off Lake Michigan. And he called us, and I said, "Yeah, man, we'd love to do that. It's like literally in my backyard." So that weekend we were up diving. So it had been found, and we knew, we had to get a line on it and things like that. But we dropped down, and it's a gorgeous wreck, and there's like a 1927 Chevrolet Coupe on this wreck, and the car was 1 year old when it sank, and it's still almost completely intact. You can still see the Chevy logo. You can still see the license plate. The tires, there was almost no rubber wore off it. It was fascinating. So again, it was so cool because it was unusual to see, a car on a wreck underwater. So, the hunt is certainly, it's exciting. It's hours of tedium, but it's, if you get it, it makes it all worthwhile. I guess, the journey is certainly, you remember every bit of the journey as much as the actual find.
Yeah, no, I could only imagine. So are there, and I don't know if it's a hush hush thing, but what are are there shipwrecks that are out there that you're trying to find? Like, is there any journeys going on right now? Any hunts going on right now?
Yeah. There's a few, and I do have to confess that I'm probably, I would much sooner be the hired gun that gets to go once the find is made, I guess. But there is a couple of wrecks, and some of them are up in Georgian Bay, not that far from where the Manassoon is that we're looking for, and then the other ones in Lake Huron. The technology now and the information that we have, GPS. There's so many people, amateurs. We're people out there with a boat and a fish, and they're finding stuff. We're finding stuff a lot. Discoveries are being made all the time. The last probably since we've been on the rebreather, the number of new wrecks I've had a chance to dive in the last 8 years is probably way more than my first, 25 years. What the rebreather has done, on open circuit, the Gunilda at 250 was kind of as far as we really wanted to go. And certainly, when we did the boxcar at 285, we kind of went, 300 feet, that's it. We're not taking open circuit any farther. We're weekend warriors. We have day jobs, and we just can't be out here. We're not. We don't have a team. We don't have a chamber. We're up in the bush. So, but the rebreather changed a lot of that. So stuff that that was maybe 200 feet was our max. Now we're saying, okay, yeah, 350, let's do it. 100 meters, let's go. 300 footers now are what we used to think about with 200 footers. So the technology now with the rebreather has been, for what I'll just say, the sport enthusiast, which I still consider myself to be. It's been a game changer for us. And as we get older, it's certainly we're getting a smoother decompression profile with a rebreather because we can keep our PO2 exactly where we want it to be all the way through the decompression curve. That's an advantage that sometimes we don't think about, but I feel much better, decompressing out through, using a rebreather than open circuit. It's a big benefit.
Just a couple of last questions. What model Revo do you have? Because it's actually a unit that one of the units that I'm looking at. Just because it's I know there's no perfect rebreather out there. I've heard that plenty of times, and a lot of people, you'll have one party that's like, oh, the Revo is the best thing in the world. The other party's like, stay away from the Revo. But it is one of the units that I'm looking at. You want to tell me a little bit about yours and what led to the decision to choose that one?
I actually have two. The one that I bought, it's kind of the first one I owned. It's a version 3. It's a full size manual machine, steel, and I like that one for diving in the lakes because I'm a big guy. I'm a tall guy. I'm a heavy guy, and so just the length of the full size fits me well. The extra weight helps. I don't really have to wear. I think I have 5 pounds in an upper tray, and that's all I need with a full size manual. But I also have a micro titanium hybrid, so it has the solenoid, and I like it. It's a fabulous machine for travel because it's small, it's very light. So that's kind of the one. If I'm cave diving, we're traveling. I did a trip to truck with it in 2019. It was great to travel with. It was I could put that in a suitcase, and it's coming in at 42 pounds with the suitcase. So you can you're not paying over baggage and things like that. So one of the disadvantages I have, and one of the things I would like to change is I'd like to do some cross training on other machines. The Revo is the only machine I've ever dove on. It's the only one I'm certified on. As you said, if you have somebody telling you their machine is the best machine out there, then stay away from that person because they're not telling you the truth. Every single machine, there's design features that are great, and there's design features that are just absolutely awful. And the Revo falls in that category. For what I'm doing, the majority of diving I'm doing with wreck diving, I do like the Revo, and the main reason I like it is because it doesn't have a head, it doesn't have electronics. It's all controlled through the sheer water. So we needed a machine that if we're up in the upper Lake Superior, we're 5-6 hours drive from a gas station, much less a dive shop. So when we started diving up there, we learned we had to be as completely self sufficient. We got to take all our own spares. All any repairs have to be done. And my buddy Jeff Lindsay and I were diving up in Upper Lake Michigan, and he had a failure of his nerd, and he was able to, on a kitchen table, take the Fisher connector out, put in a Revo handset, and he was diving the next day. So field serviceability of the Revo is certainly one of its strengths. It's not flood recoverable, and that's probably the biggest disadvantage. It is somewhat flood tolerant. It'll take some water, but you can't recover. Like once it's in there, it's not coming out. So again, I think people that are looking at rebreathers, I think a couple things. You need to look at how close, and what kind of support can you get for repairs, parts, that kind of stuff. What are your buddies going to be diving, and then what's your environment? So if I was cave diving a lot, I'd take a look at Charlie's Fathom. I am still kind of looking at it, but there's that one. I know you can use it for wreck diving as well, but it was designed and developed by cave divers with flood recoverability being a huge. If you're in a cave, you can't. You got to be able to recover from a flood. So there's things about that, and you can get much larger scrubbers for some of the longer duration dives that they're doing. Up in the Great Lakes, we'll do longest is maybe 3.5 hours, because it's just too cold. To the temperature issue becomes more of a consideration than machine or sword capacity. We've certainly, I know Jeff Lindsay and I we both dive Revos, and we've been able to take them some pretty cool places. We use them in the caves too, but we're not doing as long not as long exposures as some of the locals down there. Revo is certainly worth considering. I know it's a popular machine.
Yeah, and to be honest, that's why the instructor that I was talking to, because he was giving me a lot of different options, and that's kind of the hard thing when you first start getting into it. It'd almost be nice if I knew. Well, and he does have a used unit, a Revo, and that's why I was kind of like, oh, maybe I should just go down that path, because then the bank account doesn't take that big of a hit, because it's a used model. I can get the training on it. But yeah, when you start looking into rebreathers and start doing the research, it gets overwhelming sometimes, because everybody's like, this is the one that you want to go for. But the common question that I keep being asked is like, well, what do you want to do? And one of the biggest decision makers, or that one of the biggest things that's leading to my decision, is the travel capabilities, because I live where I have to pretty much hop on a plane to go and do a dive. I could do some driving, but most of the time it's on a plane. So I'm like, okay. And I have heard, obviously there's some units out there that travel very friendly, but I have heard that, just looking through scuba board, people are like, oh, you can fit a Revo, the Mini in a suitcase. They can travel very easily. So that's one of the reasons I was looking at the Revo.
Yeah, Jeff Lindsay has a Mini. I have a Micro, and it's a Micro titanium. And when I went to truck with it literally went in like an Amazon hard shell case. It pretty much went fully intact. I took the loop off and had the loop as part of my carry-on, but it went halfway around the world and back. So yeah, it's pretty lightweight, but it also displaces not that much water. So in terms of weighting, you're not dealing with a big canister that if it has an airspace, now you're trying to get weighting up. When I'm in Florida with a dry suit on a Micro titanium, I'm using no weight. They're nice machines. We've been happy with them, but again, just kind of consider for what the guys are doing really serious cave exploration. The Revo wouldn't be the one I would look at, but there are some advantages to the Revo as well. So.
Two last questions. One is just kind of a funny question. I was going to say, so you said when you get down to Florida, you are in a dry suit, but I would assume when you get down to Florida, you guys probably could just jump in there with some swimming trunks and nothing else, right? Coming from the Canada area. It must be like extremely warm for you down there.
Well, it's nice because we're bare hands. You know, the springs are 72 degrees. So what's that? 21 Celsius, I guess. You know, so it is nice, but you know, longer exposures you will chill down. We used to dive wetsuits there, and I hated it. You know, it was awful. But yeah, it's you know, we kind of slide into that, and it feels great. So heading down in about a month. We're gonna go down for about a week. So
Oh, awesome, awesome. Yeah, I was planning to make it back to the States at the end of this year, but some changes in plans. So hopefully I'll be there towards the beginning of next year. I don't know if I'll make it to Florida, but definitely Texas. And then I'd like to do some other interstate traveling just to kind of, it's, you know, possibly California. I have a lot of family, but that's another story for another day. So my last question for you is any advice that you would have for future or even like you said amateur hunters out there looking for wrecks, or you know they're starting to get, you know, maybe they just took their open water course and they're really interested in finding some wrecks, or just kind of, you know, any advice for those newer divers looking into going down the path that you went into? Sometimes I'll phrase it as, what would you have told yourself fresh out of open water? What piece of advices would you give to that person?
yeah, you know, and I know because you've asked this every time on the podcast, so I was ready for it, but not quite, I guess. But um, because I look back at my career, and I really I feel good about, you know, we always had a next step, but by the same token, you know, I was 5 years to go from a basic diver to an instructor, and in that period of time, you know, I had a lot of fun with a single aluminum 80 going out and, you know, doing 30-foot dives and quarries and things like that. So I guess the nice thing is right now, you know, embrace the technology. The technology, you know, again, I look back, you know, even the last decade, you know, the technology continues to get better and better. Rebreathers, you know, even a decade ago were they were kind of scary, you know, but now, you know, again, you'll go places and it'll be amazing how many people will be on a machine. You know, embrace the technology, but I guess don't go too fast. You know, take time to enjoy the things because you never, you know, those early dives, they never come back. Sometimes, you know, when I'm teaching, people will ask me, well, what's the coolest dive you've ever done? And they're always looking for some deep, you know, scary thing. And I said, you know what? The most fun dive I ever had was one time I was teaching, and it was a rainy day, and I'm upside down in 7 feet of water watching it rain from the bottom. And I said that was I spent 20 minutes watching it rain, and it was the coolest experience. I had a great time, you know. So it's, you know, people can get overly goal driven, and it's good to have goals. It's good to have things to shoot for, but a lot of zeros to heroes, you know, and it's kind of scary, you know, and I worry for those people because those people end up quite often being the statistics that we're talking about. You know, take the time to enjoy it, you know, and I had a chance to do some single tank diving in Jordan in June, and it was great. You know, we're in 50 feet of water, really warm, great visibility, and I got a single aluminum 80 on. You know, and it felt great. It felt great. So, but
That's that's awesome. I was actually just about to ask, do other than teaching, do you ever do the single tank dive? Because I know some people, once they kind of pass the point, they're like, I won't ever throw a single tank on. But I don't think I'll ever get past that, because to me, and I even say it on my bio, like, you know, give me 30 feet and a warm, you know, warm water reef dive, and I'm happy camper, just enjoying the fish go by. So. Well, that's awesome, man. No, that's amazing. I appreciate that. That's really good advice. And once again, man, I really appreciate you coming on to the podcast. It's great to hear your story, and I look forward to future finds that you have in store, and future, you know, hearing about those dives and everything. So I don't know if I'll ever get to the locomotive. Maybe I'll prep myself to try to do a dive like that, but it's a slow progression for me, so we'll see. And I'll be honest, I have not truly been diving in cold water, so that's something that I'll have to at least try at some point. So I'll have to make it up to your part of the world and try some Great Lakes diving.
Yes, you're certainly welcome to come up. We got lots of cool stuff to explore.
Awesome. Well, thank you once again, man, for coming on to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nick. It's great.
Off Gassing, a scuba podcast.